William Kornhauser, born in Chicago in 1925, attended the University of Chicago's own high school, known as the Lab School, before going on to earn his college degrees also from the University of Chicago. He served for 3 years in Italy in the Army Air Force's 20th Bomb Squadron during World War II. He returned to Chicago to complete his PhD in sociology in 1953. So he was a student there while Louis Wirth and other guiding lights of the Chicago School were teaching in the department. After a year teaching at Columbia University, Kornhauser moved to Berkeley in time to join several other scholars who catapulted the sociology department there into national and international preeminence in political and industrial sociology. Kornhauser's ideas resonated in particular with student radicals during the 1960s, and this article from 1968 is an excellent example of such work. As he became more radicalized, he became estranged from all but a few of his former friends and colleagues and died in 2004, deeply pessimistic about the fate of a nation for which he had served in the military during World War II. This article is important because it continues and expands the basic perspective of Louis Wirth about the alienating effect that the scale, complexity, and anonymity of urban life might have, not only on individual personalities, but as a result on the larger structures and organization of society itself. His idea of mass society builds on Wirth's briefer comments about institutional consequences of urbanism for entire social systems, and has been endlessly copied and reinvented by imitators. For example, recent work by Robert Putnam on bowling alone and the decline of social capital is little more than a cover of Kornhauser's work 50 years after the original ideas appeared. The idea of mass society, described in this classic entry in the International Encyclopedia of the Social Sciences, begins with the urban anomie perspective that Kornhauser picked up from Louis Wirth as one of his professors in graduate school at Chicago. But Kornhauser not only describes some possible personal psychological effects for individuals who live in cities, he also links these individual level effects to the results for a whole society when such effects spread through the population. His theoretical focus on mass society connects the study of individual attitudes, circumstances, and behavior to the institutional structure of an entire society, a connection that is not often made in sociology, where scholars tend to study one or the other. This connection is based on Kornhauser's fundamental point about the essence of the mass character of society. He points to the scale at which any kind of social activity is organized, whether it be finding a mate, getting food for your dinner, connecting to the sacred through religion, or working to provide the products that improve the quality of life. More people joined in coordinated activity creates a larger scale of that activity. Making shoes from start to finish would be the smallest possible scale. On the other hand, Ford Motor Company's 160,000 employees worldwide are coordinated in the mass production of cars and trucks, not to mention the additional hundreds of thousands of people coordinated into other firms to produce all the materials that go into the cars, or to sell and repair them, or to provide the fuel that powers them and the roads on which we drive them. Until large populations are unified politically into large countries, it can be more difficult to create this mass scale of coordination in any activity. Kornhauser makes the point that, quote, large populations do not by themselves produce mass relations. In the past, large societies were divided into many segments with relatively clear boundaries, unquote. In the time of the Holy Roman Empire in Europe several centuries ago, literally hundreds of little fragmented, independent feudal territories created a political jigsaw puzzle that defied any such mass coordination, except notably for religion, since the Roman Catholic Church managed to impose a mass religion over the region and even beyond. Only later, when these territories witnessed the often violent creation of much larger nation-states, did economic coordination become possible for mass production and consumption of material goods. Emergence of mass production within these new nation-states has already been discussed by other writers who talked about the Industrial Revolution as a foundation for the appearance of urban societies. Kornhauser insists that whenever such mass-scale coordination takes place, It involves a standardization of the activity in question. For mass production, this means interchangeable parts, so that any steering assembly or brake pad or tail light produced anywhere in the mass system can be fitted into any particular example of a car of that model. To produce uniform, standardized parts and products, the production process itself also becomes standardized. The assembly line, with workers or robots performing exactly the same operation on each unit of product as it passes, became a powerful symbol of mass production as a social and economic process. Of course, thousands or even millions of virtually identical cars, jackets, television sets, or pizzas may be efficient to produce, but this is no use to anyone unless people themselves, as consumers, also develop standardized tastes and patterns of consumption. New cars always appear in late summer. Pizza ads appear most frequently on television just before the dinner hour. Candy companies and soft drink companies spend vast sums on market research and advertising to create a taste culture dominated by their products, just as producers of clothing, cars, or shoes work constantly to train us as consumers so that we feel a powerful need to buy their products. Not only the production, but also the distribution and sale of all these products is coordinated at a mass scale, so that you can find exactly the same shoe or car or hamburger everywhere in the country, indeed sometimes everywhere in the world, in a shop that looks as much like every other shop of its kind as possible. Equally important, these mass production and distribution organizations make all their transactions, from buying boxcars of rolled steel to retail sales of an SUV or motorcycle, based on standardized units of value counted as money. They then pay all their employees in these same standardized units, and a key job of political governments is to regulate and protect this symbolic system of value by defining and enforcing the rules about money, again at a mass scale. Finally, Kornhauser turns to the more intangible question of how all this mass coordination is actually accomplished, describing the emergence of mass media of communication. The earliest version of these mass media appeared with the interchangeable type and the printing press, and has continued to evolve and expand into our contemporary information society, in which members of the population can be in unprecedented contact with each other and with an increasing volume of third-party information. However, the key to the mass character of any activity, including communication, rests for Kornhauser on the question of its coordination. Mobile phones and the internet do not constitute mass communication unless the communications between members of the population are somehow coordinated, standardized, and integrated into a larger process. Each example of mass phenomena, both production and consumption, as well as communication, has at its heart the element of centralized control. This aspect of mass society is most sinister when it comes to communication, because it implies purposeful filtering and control of the flow of information itself. Some naive observers suggest that the interactive information age is breaking down the old mass character of communication into a liberating free-for-all of decentralized decision-making and consumer autonomy. And indeed, this new age has posed one of the greatest challenges to the task of centralized control. But that control already is reasserting itself and will accelerate toward reintegration of the population into a mass organization for production and consumption, guided by the mass media. While it is true that each of us is gaining access to a larger and larger body of information through our interactive media, the growth of the total volume of information, including information about us and our actions, is exponentially faster than the expansion of what we each know and see as individuals. Only ask yourself, once a truly interactive web of information provides a detailed, unified picture of all aspects of your personal life, how much of the available information out there will be systematically denied to you and excluded from your everyday world by the filters and directed advertising that will be applied to you, in everything from consumer choices to opportunities for prospective jobs or information about political activity. There's nothing liberating at all about such a vision of the future. The watchwords in every aspect of Kornhauser's description of mass society are standardization, uniformity, predictability, and coordination. This extends not only to how we produce and sell material things, or to how we communicate with each other, but also to how we organize our educational system based on standardized ages for attending standardized grades in school, where we learn standardized facts and skills in order to pass standardized tests and receive standardized diplomas. It even extends to how we participate in the political process, since that process also is transformed from a pyramid of personal ties and loyalties built up from the local to the national level into a new centralized operation of mass political parties that franchise their operation to local participants and then condition the consumer to prefer their brand through advertising. As a perceptive person, no doubt you may already be asking yourself, what does any of this mass society business have to do with cities? What is Kornhauser's article doing in a discussion of urban society? But if you go back to his article, you will find hints to the answer already in his first pages. He shows us the opposite of mass society in what he calls villages, where people know each other personally and interact face to face. In these bygone places, people sustain primary relationships and their lives are shaped and controlled by primary groups. And the opposite of the village is the city. Once the city appears, mass society begins to appear within it and eventually even reaches out to swallow up the remaining rural population as well in its mass relations. Later in the article, in fact, Kornhauser's words are an almost perfect echo of Lewis Worth writing several decades earlier, when he says, quote, "As it becomes dependent on the city, the rural community loses its significance and cohesion. The city does not develop the communal life that was formerly provided by the rural community. Instead of affiliation with a community, the urban resident frequently experiences considerable social isolation and personal anonymity," unquote. We couldn't ask for a better description of urban anomie as a byproduct of urban life. Mass society is urban society, and apparently urban society is destined to become mass society. They're two sides of the same coin. So is this transformation of our lives that happens in urban society a good thing or a bad thing? Given the threatening aspects of this picture that Kornhauser sketches for us, you might be tempted to assume that he regards it as an unmitigated disaster. Look at urban society through the tinted lenses of urban anomie theory, as Kornhauser does, you're bound to get the impression that primary relationships and primary groups suffer a kind of corrosive destruction in this mass environment. In Kornhauser's language, a sense of community based on primary ties breaks down in the city. And here he makes the same assumption that most other believers in urban anomie also make, that we as human beings have a strong, deeply embedded need, almost a hunger for this kind of community. In a word, humans belong to that category of the animal kingdom that innately want to run in packs or herds. We are not a lone wolf species, and even the lone wolf actually also runs in packs. The truly solitary species, like tigers or bears or condors, on the other hand, shun others of their kind and find the presence of these others to be threatening and uncomfortable. From Lewis Worth to Kornhauser and down to the present day, urban anomie theory generally chooses this additional assumption about human nature, that we want to live in packs. Looking at primates in general, this may not be a bad assumption either. Assuming that we crave a sense of community and belonging, then, if our primary groups are ground to dust in fast-paced, large-scale city life, we're going to be looking around for alternatives. Kornhauser says that mass organizations step in to fill the need. Starved for a sense of belonging, we are easily recruited into groups that offer us some sense of belonging to something, even if we never actually interact with any of the other members of the group on an individual basis. The American Association for Retired Persons is an outstanding example of such a mass organization, and inevitably finds you no matter where you're hiding in the country and sends you a letter after letter as soon as you reach age 50, urging you to join. Yet almost no AARP member has ever had a casual personal interaction with another member based solely on their shared membership. They're held together in a group from headquarters through the envelopes in their mailboxes and emails in their inboxes. This sort of membership doesn't give people much chance to actually make any decisions for the organization as a whole. Mass organizations, Kornhauser suggests, tend to have passive members who only follow orders and never give them, because they don't have actual personal connections with any of the decision makers at the top. The most infamous example of such passivity and following of orders might be the Nazi Party in Germany late in the first half of the 20th century. But probably you can think of plenty of other examples of mass organizations filled with passive followers, whose actions and even ideas are shaped and motivated by the small elite at the center. This kind of mass organization has a constant problem of high turnover, because the weak secondary ties that hold people in the group break much more easily than a primary relationship. This explains why AARP so urgently sends me a letter every other month, because other people keep dropping out of the group. They're trying to keep the organization alive and preserve the jobs of the people working for it. So far, they haven't gotten any dues from me. Finally, a mass organization poses new challenges for its leaders because they don't even know most of the members except as names on a roster. This means that political parties, alumni associations, and other mass groups must be coordinated impersonally by mass communication. The leaders of the group must do their very best to control the media that carry these signals, and to manage these signals carefully to coordinate the attitudes and actions of their members. Any other way to reach out to such a mass audience of members simply wouldn't work. Although Kornhauser clearly does find some features of mass society to be rather frightening, he did not write this article in order to try to frighten people about what he saw happening in the world around him. In this article, he tries his best to be a dispassionate observer and simply describe the world as it is, with all of its warts and blemishes, but also with its bright spots and possibilities. Of course, no actual human limited to his or her own perceptions of a particular slice of life in a particular time and place could ever serve as a truly objective, neutral observer, but that is a standard to which he and most other social scientists aspire. This explains why we can find some extended discussion in this article about the virtues of mass society. For example, he points out that, quote, all members of mass society are equally valued as voters, buyers, and spectators, unquote. While this might sound impersonal to some people, impersonal can be good, if personal means things like bullying, racial discrimination, and other very personal kinds of unfair treatment. The old pre-urban community spirit that evaporates in cities included lifelong persecution of some people in the community by others, based on very individualized, particularistic differences between them. If you happen to be someone who would have been the victim of such mistreatment in the up-close and personal world of the village, the anonymity and mass equalitarianism of urban mass society can be a liberating breath of fresh air, a taste of freedom from your neighbors. Similarly, once everyone is subjected to standardized rules in everyday life, the personal connections that give some people special advantages in access to jobs, or homes, or public spaces, or even food and clothing, are replaced by equal access for everyone. Now, no doubt you'll protest that even today we must not be living in a completely mass society, because people from some families continue to enjoy vast fortunes of inherited wealth that they never earned, and to gain all kinds of special privileges in life, from the schools they attend to the people they marry and the houses in which they live. Kornhauser would agree completely that some vestiges of the old pre-mass society world still survive in the midst of the new. But the daughter of a billionaire and the son of an unemployed construction worker still have to stand in the same line to take their driving test and get a driver's license. Mass organizations, both public and private, have an inherent tendency and vested interest to recruit new employees and members on this same basis of mass equalitarianism. In employment, this is known as merit hiring and is the opposite of giving the job to the boss's daughter or nephew. At a small scale, family ties may still produce efficient outcomes, at least for some firms. Those where the daughter or the nephew turn out to be useless incompetents will fail, but this won't hurt the system as a precisely because they're small firms. Bell Electric or General Mills or General Motors or General Dynamics can't afford to hire only the boss's daughters and nephews because so much is riding on the outcome. The fact that their daughters and nephews are doing so well tells us that particularism has not yet been eliminated by mass equalitarianism. Finally, Kornhauser suggests that even in the arena of politics, the coming of mass society means leaders at least seek the approval of the citizens, even if they don't have much or any real decision-making power. As he puts it, quote, "Political regimes strive to be popular regimes, whether they are dictatorial or constitutional." Unquote. Chronic failure to cultivate this mass approval from the population governed produce unfortunate results, as the leaders of Egypt and several other countries discovered all across North Africa and the Middle East in the early 21st century. So there are some positive aspects of living in a mass society, particularly for people who would have been at the bottom of the ladder in a more personally controlled pre-urban social world and subjected to direct, individualized personal discrimination and mistreatment. Kornhauser is far from happy with this apparent tide sweeping over the world, and consider his final judgments about mass society and what it holds in store for each of us if we're going to live in it. He assumes that people innately need to belong to a community. He also judges that fast-paced, anonymous, large-scale urban social life disintegrates this sense of community, making people feel unsatisfied and vulnerable. As he puts it, quote, "People are receptive to direct appeals from remote elites because they are poorly attached to proximate symbols and relationships." Unquote. At the same time, he knows perfectly well that not everybody in society has had all their primary relationships demolished by city life. But he points out that once the mass society begins gaining momentum, this new way of organizing life can rob the remaining locally oriented primary relationships of their relevance in people's lives. Local ties to family, a local church congregation, and other face-to-face groups may continue to operate, but Kornhauser suspects that this aspect of life no longer has much impact on the larger scale operations in society. Even in the midst of their local groups, people can feel cut off and left behind by the new mass character of life. Quote, "The locally attached, in their resentment of the ascendancy of big cities, big government, big business, and big labor, become receptive to the appeals of mass movements." Unquote. These movements, he says, tend to appeal to two very different groups of people, both marginalized by increasing scale and equalitarianism in social life. Some people use mass movements like the civil rights movement to improve their position within the new mass society, to embrace it and become more full participants. These people often identify with disadvantaged minorities defined by religion, sexual orientation, ethnicity, or some other mass identifier. At the same time, other people use mass movements like the Tea Party as a weapon against the mass society itself, trying to turn back to the pre-urban, pre-mass arrangements of the past. These people often are older, with memories of a different earlier time, but also include those who enjoyed special particularistic privileges in the past, based on personal characteristics like family names and fortunes, or local social networks that have been eclipsed in the modern world. Kornhauser was a little uncomfortable with the complaints that he himself raises about the negative features of mass society, because, as he points out, these criticisms mostly originated with the reactionary thinkers who saw the rise of democracy and ideals like liberty, equality, and fraternity, the watchwords of the French Revolution, as threats to social order. In the good old days, these reactionary writers claimed, societies operated on a natural order that included features like the divine right of kings, the inheritance of occupations, and a general acceptance by the population that some people were naturally better and more deserving of education, wealth, and opportunities than other people. In a word, the negative reviews of mass society boil down to an assumption that all men are not created equal, that some are born to rule and others are born to be ruled. If you go around promoting mass equalitarianism, or even worse, if it is forced upon us by the irresistible power of modernization, industrialization, and urbanization, the resulting mass society will be filled with crowds of anonymous, disoriented people who frankly can't handle all that freedom and responsibility. Masses are dangerous. They're manipulated because they're starved for real personal connections, like those they experienced when they were household servants on estates like Downton Abbey. It may have been a rigid, unjust hierarchy of inherited privilege, but we love it for the personal connections and sense of community. This old pre-urban community is swept away. What in the world can take its place? Kornhauser borrows the answer given by those long ago pessimists, even though he's not happy about doing so. He tells us that cynical elites will use the hunger of the masses for their own private purposes by offering them an illusion of community, what he calls pseudo community. Quote, ideologies and programs simulate but do not create community, and consequently they make people more available for manipulation and mobilization, the fabrication of symbols and relations, the exploitation of unfulfilled needs for personal response. Unquote. His assumption that we desperately need to belong to a community jumps right out from this quote. If anything happens to our sense of community, we are so confused and unhappy that we will run after the first charlatan who promises to restore that feeling, but only if we deposit money in his bank, or vote for him in an election, or buy our next car from his dealership, or fight in his army, or go to his church. This vital sense of community becomes bait. We all become rats, and we run after every Pied Piper. Who then are these Pied Pipers leading us around based on our fears and hunger for belonging? Kornhauser realizes that these leaders can't be identified in a mass society by any specific kind of personal characteristics. Instead, in order to lead mass organizations and take control of mass society, people must establish a public image for themselves through the mass media of communication, an image that gives them the appearance of authority. But this authority no longer is based on lifelong personal interaction, as with the authority of parents over their children. Like pseudo-community, this pseudo-authority might be nothing but an illusion. Quote, where mass media and the techniques of manipulation and mobilization are highly developed, conditions of mass society facilitate the fabrication of charisma in the absence of value commitment on the part of either leaders or masses. Unquote. When huge numbers of people are organized into religious denominations or political parties or labor unions with hundreds of thousands of members, there is simply no other way to run these large-scale operations. The members can never really get to know the leaders, and the leaders will probably never meet most of the members. This means that the specific life situations of each person no longer can serve as the basis for feeling some shared identity in the group. People in the group can't even absorb enough information to know such details about each other. Instead, they must find some kind of general stereotyped symbol that they can all agree on and share. Varying details of their personal lives dictates that such symbols usually will be abstract and standardized, something that will fit on a bumper sticker, a word or a slogan that is vague enough that each person can fill in the blanks with their own personal varieties of meaning. Kornhauser even thinks that the best such symbols have as little actual substance or meaning as possible. They are most effective, quote, especially where the symbols are widely stereotyped in terms that do not invite close scrutiny or comparison with actual experience, unquote. If you truly do have an innate hunger to feel like you belong to a tribe or a herd or a pack, and if that feeling can't truly be satisfied in modern urban society, then Kornhauser's vision of mass society seems inevitable, and more than a little depressing. If you don't like this perspective on urban life, then you have to go after one or both of these assumptions: that you do have such an innate hunger for community, or that true community is impossible in cities. If they're both true, you're out of luck. If one of them is false, you may have a chance yet.